our lecturer, who came specially for this occasion, we asked Dr. Ramadan the authorization to use the amphitheater of the Kuwaiti Writers Association, and I would like to thank him very much for giving us this beautiful place and for allowing us to welcome many people. I would also like to thank our speaker, Dr. Cedric Beylock, for his availability and interest in coming to visit Kuwait City. Dr. Cedric Beylock holds a PhD in anthropology from the University of Bordeaux. He is a lecturer at the Catholic Institute in Paris and an associate researcher at the Research Center in the Institute of Political Sciences in Bordeaux. Between 2015 and 2019, he has been appointed as a counselor at the French Ministry of Interior, notably in charge of a fund dedicated to support research in social sciences and contemporary Islam and Islamic studies, after which he has been appointed as a policy advisor at the MENA Department of the French Ministry of Foreign Affairs for 2 years. Dr. Beylock is dealing with topics like Islam in France and Morocco, secularism, religious authority in Islam, contemporary Islamic thought, and Islamist movements. He published many articles and books, among them in dialogue with the leading figure in France, the Imam of Bordeaux, Dr. Tarek Obo. Today, he will speak about the French Islam from social history to contemporary issues, and summarize in Arabic the main ideas of each part of his presentation without giving a full translation. We could then have the time for a interesting debate. Thank you. Please.
Dr. عباس شكرا جزيلا. Madame l'Ambassadrice, President Ramadan, Mr. and Mrs. Firas, and thank you to be here, as well as the whole audience. And I'm going to get directly right now to the issue, because we have a translation. We will have a translation. It's 15 to 20 minutes. So, the home of secularism, France, has a long and not so well-known positive history with Islam. Chiefly, it is now home to about 5 million Muslims from many diverse sensibilities and backgrounds. Let's be clear, the assumption that France is unfriendly to the expression of religion is largely spread, particularly in Muslim-majority countries. Yet, one aspect of French history shows an early interest and contacts with Islam. Second, the core of French laïcité implies freedom of religion. We'll see that. And third, recent initiatives show strengthened and public effort in favor of a productive dialogue with Islam. So here are the 3 parts, and we'll begin right now by some ancient examples of relationships and interest in Islam in France, between Islam and France, if we want to shift. Okay. So one of the most ancient trace of a Muslim presence in France has been quite recently discovered by archaeologist Yves Glaise from INRA. With his team, in 2016, they found 3 Muslim graveyards dating back from, you can see here, dating back from 9th century in southeast France, Nîmes, the city of Nîmes, or close to the city of Nîmes, with some coins and ceramic fragments. The corpses were buried in the Qibla direction. Those artifacts are a testimony for the ancient settlement of a small group there, a small group of Muslims, certainly from Spain, in the region of Fraxinet, around the Saint-Tropez, southeast France. Without transition, but still 9th century, we could remain in the early 9th century and mention Harun al-Rashid, who is, as you know, considered as one of the greatest caliphs, which power extended from Iraq, English and Arabic, to most of what today is Iran. And it was at the height of his reign when Charlemagne became emperor of the West in 800. The relations between the French and Muslims began even prior to Charlemagne, with Pepin le Bref, in 765 with Caliph al-Mansur. So Baghdad is founded a few years later, and France began to develop diplomatic relations, mostly for economics, military, and even religious reasons, notably the custody of Saint-Sepulchre in Jerusalem. Those relations continued even after Charlemagne's death, so that there was a long period of interactions. So after Charlemagne's death, with his son reappeared. Why? Because Abbasids and France have the same enemies, right? The Umayyads from Al-Andalus were refusing the Abbasid Caliphate while pushing up to the north. So having a common enemy helps to establish links. And I like these examples because it also dismissed the idea of an homogeneous Ummah against the West, or even an homogeneous West against the Islamic world. And an early examples, so against the Huntingtonian vision. Without transition, let's shift to one of the major diplomatic agreements you certainly know between French Catholic sovereign and the Sultan, which are the capitulation, the negotiation at that time. That was the sense of the word capitulation between François Ier and Suleiman the Magnificent in 1536. These advantages granted by the Ottoman Sultan to the French monarchy concentrates mostly on trade and diplomacy. Less known example should be reminded. At the end of the 16th century, prior to becoming King Henry IV, Henry of Navarre welcomed many thousands of Moriscos who flee persecutions from Spain a few years after the Reconquista. Then, of course, the colonial times, 1798, Napoleon's expedition, and then from 1830 on, French colonial rule over Algeria, West Africa, etc., etc. But this is not what we will be talking about today. There is many works on those issues. Henri Laurence, Jalila's Bai, may also rest in peace. She died a few months ago. Benjamin Stora, etc., to name but a few. Another point which does not have to be forgotten is the fact that Paris, so Paris, we shift from an era to another, right? And then we shift to contemporary issues. Paris became, by the end of the 19th century, a refuge for Muslim intellectuals. For instance, in 1884, reformist Mohammed Abdou, who would later become the Grand Mufti, reformist Grand Mufti of Egypt in 1899, met Jamal ad-Din al-Afghani, who joined him in Paris to found the review Al-Urwat al-Wufq, le lien indissoluble. I didn't translate it to English. Strong link, yeah. Which constitutes one of the first major publications for the Nahda movement. But of course, the greatest example of, the greatest symbol, we'll get to it. Yeah, I don't know if you see here, the greatest symbol of Muslim presence in France is, of course, La Grande Mosquée de Paris Grand Mosque, inaugurated in 1926 and described by C. Hamza Abubakar, his second rector. We'll have a look on his biography later on, as une perle de l'islam enchâssée dans les lumières de Paris, a pearl of Islam embodied in French luminaries. So, still regarding the Grand Mosque of Paris, Édouard Herriot, a politician at that time, defended at the Chamber of the Deputies on June 1920, despite the existence of the separation law, which has been voted in 1905. He defended an allocation of a credit of $500,000 to the Muslim Institute of the Grand Mosque of Paris through these words that I'm going to translate directly to English. If the war has sealed on the battlefields the brotherhood between friends and Muslims, and if more than 100,000 of our fellows die in the service of fatherland henceforth common, this fatherland must hold to honor, to mark as soon as possible by acts its recognition and its memory. So through building the Grand Mosque of Paris that you saw in the first slide. So this was just a few examples at the historical level, strictly speaking, but some examples at the cultural and academic level also deserve to be mentioned. So those are the illustration of what we've seen. And then there is also, we can call the French academic Arabo, I wrote it 2 times, so Arabo and Islamophilia. France has a great academic tradition of specialists in Islam, such as Louis Massignon, Henri Corbet, Louis Gardet, Denise Masson. So I just mentioned a few here. You can see the bibliography of Louis Massignon, very important figure for Christian Islamo-Christian relations. He was especially at Haraj, denominated the Collège de France in 1926, and co-founder of one of the first French review in Islamic studies, the Revue d'études islamiques. Louis Gardet also had an importance in the early knowledge on Islam in France, with all his introductory books, Connaître l'Islam, 1951, Introduction to Islamic Theology, just after the Second World War, and so on and so forth. Also, Henri Corbin, specialist of Sahara and Shiism. Denise Masson, his translation of the Quran is considered still as one of the most important. Let's put it that way. And Henri Larouste, also who introduced to the thought of Encyclopedia and Anbali School of Law in France. Of course, in an academic way, in an academic fashion, not a theology. So, and I'm happy to say here that we proposed, along with Professor Najmeddin Khalfallah from the University of Nancy, a project at the Arable Institute in Paris around those figures of Islamic studies in France, entitled Knowing Islam, a French Academic Journey, and it has been recently accepted by the Institute. Still a long way to go. We have to build the museographic installation and so on and so forth. But that would be, I think, a great event. I think I left my 15 minutes, or you can now translate this first part. Yeah, just last figure. Even before those I quoted, the Chair of Arabic Philology at Collège de France has been founded by Henry III in 1587 and given to a physician and Arabist Arnaud de Lille, was a major figure between France and Morocco, but I don't have the time to detail his biography.
شكرا. كما أشرت إليه في المقدمة، سأقوم بترجمة يعني شاملة لما قام به الدكتور يعني في القسم الأول. أنا أقوم بترجمة حرفية. طيب، بالنسبة للقسم الأول الذي كان عنوانه علاقة العلاقات التاريخية بين فرنسا والإسلام، أعطانا الدكتور مشكورا بعض اللمحات التاريخية والأمثلة الملموسة عن واقع الإسلام والمسلمين في فرنسا. رجع إلى القرن التاسع ميلادي، حيث تم اكتشاف قبور المسلمين في جنوب فرنسا في مدينة سان تروبي سنة 2016، وتأكد لدى المختصين في علم الآثار أن الجثث دفنت حسب تعاليم الدين الإسلامي، مثل توجيه الرأس إلى القبلة وغير ذلك من مراسيم الدفن. وهذا دليل طبعا على وجود فئات مسلمة هاجرت إلى فرنسا وأقامت هناك، وقد يكون هذا الحضور المسلم مرتبطا طبعا بالهجرة إلى إسبانيا منذ القرن الثامن ميلادي. هناك أيضا مثال ثاني يسوقه الدكتور، وهو وجود علاقات بين شارلمان إمبراطور الغرب اللاتيني وهارون الرشيد الخليفة العباسي المعروف في أواخر القرن الثامن ميلادي. معروف تاريخيا أنه تم تبادل البعثات الدبلوماسية بين الشخصيتين، إضافة إلى تبادل بعض الهدايا، حيث كان كل من هارون الرشيد وشارلمان يطمح إلى خلق نوع من التحالف السياسي ضد البيزنطيين من جهة وضد الأمويين في الأندلس من جهة أخرى. وقد بين الدكتور على وجود من خلال هذا المثال على وجود علاقات سياسية قديمة لم تكن خاضعة لمنطق الولاء الديني أو الانتماء العقائدي، وإنما فقط للحسابات السياسية. أخيرا ذكر الدكتور بيولوك مثالا تاريخيا آخر يدل على التواصل بين ملك فرنسا فرانسوا الأول والسلطان العثماني سليمان القانوني في القرن السادس عشر، وكان هذا التواصل من أجل إقامة تحالف ضد عدو مشترك أيضا هو ملك إسبانيا شارل الخامس. وقد أفرز هذا التقارب نتائج ثقافية وعلمية مهمة، من بينها إنشاء المدرسة الملكية لتعليم اللغات، وهي ما كان يسمى في تلك الفترة كولاج بالفرنسي كولاج ديليكتور مايو. وكانت هذه المدرسة تدرس اللغات الشرقية، ومن ضمنها كانت طبعا العربية تدرس أيضا في تلك المدرسة، وهي اليوم أكبر مدرسة فرنسية تسمى كولاج دو فرانس، يعني كولاج دو فرانس حاليا، وهي يعني أكبر مدرسة من حيث القيمة العلمية. أصلها في القديم هو القرن السادس عشر، وهذه المدارس الملكية التي أنشأها فرانسوا الخامس بعدما احتك بسليمان القانوني والثقافة العربية الإسلامية. يضيف الدكتور بيولوك عنصرا آخر هو كون باريس في عصر النهضة العربية كانت فضاء سهل اللقاء بين المفكرين المسلمين، واستشهد على ذلك بتأسيس مجلة العروة الوثقى في باريس من طرف محمد عبد وجمال الدين الأفغاني كما هو معروف، وكان ذلك في أواخر القرن التاسع عشر. أخيرا ذكر الدكتور العديد من المفكرين الفرنسيين، وكانت القائمة موجودة في العرض، الذين أثروا المكتبة العالمية بدراساتهم عن الإسلام. وقد قدم مشروعا لمعهد العالم العربي مع زميل يعني موجود في فرنسا ومختص أيضا في الدراسات الإسلامية، قدم مشروعا لمعهد العالم العربي وتم الاتفاق عليه يعني للتعريف بهذه الشخصيات، قامت معرض للتعريف بهذه الشخصيات الفذة وإطلاع الجمهور على أعمالها. هذا فيما يخص القسم الأول. تفضل.
شكرا جزيلا دكتور عباس. It is impressive. Most of this part of the history of France and Muslims you will find in this book, Histoire de l'Islam et des musulmans en France du Moyen Âge à nos jours. It has been edited by late Professor Mohamed Arkoun, and I wish this book could be translated into Arabic. So, Dr. Abbas, if you have time enough.
I don't have time, sorry, but I will try.
Okay, so in the second part, as I don't have a lot of time too, we will see various things, as you can see, great figures of Islam in France to embody a little bit our issue, and then cycles, and then contemporary realities, Imam, mostly, etc. So let's begin by Kadur bin Ghabrit, right here. First line, okay. Is it okay? Sorry. His life in 3 countries. He's a Maliki theologian and magistrate, trained first at the Madrasa Thalibiyya of Alger, then at the Qarawiyyin, and will then hold the statute of civil servants of the French Ministry of Foreign Affairs as an interpreter, translator, at the French legation of Tangier, Morocco, during the Protectorate, so during colonial rule. He settled something interesting, the first French mission in the Hijaz to facilitate the Hajj from France in the 1916, which would later lead him to create a society for Habus and holy places of Islam, which contributed to found the Grand Mosque of Paris. So he also organized, of course, Friday sermons in Paris, but also settled religious service for students from all nationalities, notably during Islamic celebration, etc. His surname was the most Parisian among the Muslims at that time. And to finish with, his biography is very rich, but to finish with, during the Second World War, and I think this is important to notice, he contributed to save many Jews, probably more than 1,000, the number is debated, but notably by hiding them or pretending they were Muslims. And you can see a movie from the French filmmaker Ismail Farouki, 2011, who tells the story, Les Hommes Libres, the free men. The role of Catherine Gabriel is played by the French actor Michael Lonsdale.
See Hamza Abu Bakr then, without transition.
Yes, Hamza Abu Bakr, coming from the Sufi tariqa of Sidi Oulad al-Sheikh. He became director between 1957 to 1982, so before and after the independence. This is one of the longest mandates, along with his son, who would then become also a rector in the Grand Mosque in Paris. So at the Grand Mosque, he accumulated a function of deputy he accumulated during his mandate at the Grand Mosque a function of deputy of the Department of the Oasis under the first legislature of Fifth Republic, and also a vice president of the Commission of Foreign Affairs from 1958 to 1962, the independence. So secular France had an imam as a diplomat at that time. Regarding his theological production, he began his translation of the Quran in 1965, which was then published in 1972. And I'm going to stop right here because I have a lot of things to say then. And this is also a rich biography. We could also talk a little bit about Sir Abbas Al-Hossein Ben Sheikh, distinguished traditional training, Zitouna, Qarawiyin. Back in Algeria, he became a disciple of the Algerian reformist Abdelhamid Ben Badis, famous founder of the Association of Algerian Ulema in 1931. And he became the first representative of the independent Algeria in Saudi Arabia, basically an ambassador in Jeddah. And he was nominated at the Arab League then, and then he became appointed at the Paris Red Mosque in 1982. Aged 70, but he did not spare himself, opening a second prayer room, and he also was the first to think of a fiqh and theology adapted to the secular context by advocating in particular the non-obligation of hijab for schoolgirls, even before, and I think this is what is interesting, before the first veil affair at school in France. He said, he issued basically this kind of fatwa first fatwa in secular France. Or by granting the dispensation from fasting to French Muslim pupils during their exams, for instance. And so many activities. His son Ghaleb is pursuing his reformist thought as the president of the Foundation of Islam of France. Now let's shift to the so yes, we have here the pictures. Here see Hamza Abu Bakr, and the last one here, I think with some of the Algerian Masih. Now some figures on the reality of Islam in France. Roughly, so you have several steps for Muslims in French society. First, North and West African. I think you understood this, Muslims' presence in the French army during the Second World War. Second, important labor immigration in the 50s, 60s. Law on family reunification could be considered as a third step, voted in April 1976 to facilitate visa for workers' families. And then, fourth, the acquisition, of course, of French citizenship by by the second generation and progressive institutionalization of Islam in French society through religious organizations, federations, growth in numbers of Muslim places of worship, etc. We will see that, etc., etc. So today, estimated 4 to 6 million French have a Muslim background, but no official statistics do exist. because it's forbidden, but there is some studies by INED and Research Institute in France. Some surveys. The evolution is quite interesting. In 1939, about 200,000 North African, as we would categorize at that time. 1985, about 1.5 million. 2004, about 3.6 millions, half being French by birth or acquisition. And 2020, between 5 to 6 million. More interesting than the evolution of the number,
more interesting is the evolution, I think, of the numbers of mosques in France. As you can see here, in the 80s, around 500, and then we have about 10 years later, 10 years later, 1,000, sorry, 300 mosques, and then you can see the evolution right here until today, probably about 3,000. So what it says, I think it's quite interesting, because we might discuss without taboos about political or social issues regarding the situation of French citizens who happen to be Muslim and be open to any kind of critique. But anonymat, as we say in French, we can assert that an oppressed minority wouldn't experience the growth of his places of worship in an authoritarian country. We would restrain freedom of religion. Why? Because 1905 separation law, laïcité, implies, if we apply freedom of religion, one of the more simple and complete definition is proposed by philosopher Philippe Baudin. He defines laïcité as the protection and control of freedom of thought and religion by a non-confessional state and by a law, political by nature, not religious. So to institutionally illustrate this point, I should mention that the central office of the relation with religions in France is part of the direction of public liberty and judicial affairs, which means that religions are considered as pertaining to public liberty, right? So, yeah, and I don't know if you can see this, but by comparison, I mentioned here the number of churches, temples, and 280 are the synagogues. You can see here. So next slide, and I think I'm running out of time for this part. No, it's not the third part. Why is it that we, sorry, I need to shift from the affiliations. So this is a very complex canvas, as you can see. Those organizations, most of the organizations that set those places of worship were established during the 80s. Then you have the biggest one, Union des Mosquées de France, relating to Moroccan Ministry of Hadous, Rassemblement des Musulmans de France, Interlocuteur of Moroccan Hadous, Fédération Nationale de la Mosquée de Paris, depending on the Algerian Ministry of Awqaf, Musulmans de France, more or less Muslim Brotherhood oriented, and CCMTF, the Turkish Ministry of Religious Affairs, plus Miligorj, and also representative of Muslim West African backgrounds. This constitutes a complex canvas, sometimes with competitive, divergent views on several important issues from France, such as imam training or so. And another important point is that they represent not more than 1/3 of the 3,000 mosques we've seen before. So a lot of organizations are not represented in the Conseil du culte musulman, who was supposed to be the national body for Islam in France, right? So divergent and competing interests, affiliated to foreign countries, no interest of being superseded by an independent Muslim body. This situation led to some difficulties on important issues that couldn't be grasped in that situation, that couldn't be grasped in France. So, for instance, most of the imams of those federations, apart from probably Musulman France, were sent from abroad. So, the local and French national imam training had a lot of difficulty to emerge. This is one of the questions. And then you have, of course, all the other independent movements, Tabligh, Salafism, Sufism, quite discreet but very active at the local level, and an emerging reformist movement, like, for instance, I don't know if I mentioned it in the next, yes, here, and the emergence of an emerging reformist Muslim field, ARIM, which is an association for the rebirth of Mu'tazilism in France. Velieu and Fatima Mosque, the first mosques run by women, or place of worship, not big mosque yet, etc., etc. In Africa, if you want to check Oasis review on this issue. So to finish with, there were reasons why the representativity and consultation of Muslims in France had to be both enlarged and reach the local level, not just the national one. This began with what we will be talking about in the third part, the National Dialogue Commission with the French Islam in 2015. And I'm going to stop right here.
سيدريك. إذا بالنسبة للقسم الثاني الذي كان عنوانه الشخصيات المسلمة المتميزة في فرنسا، ذكر الدكتور العديد من الشخصيات مثل عبد القادر القدور بن فبريت، وكان إمام مسجد باريس الذي تم تأسيسه سنة 1926، وكذلك كان مديره منذ الفترة الاستعمارية. ثم ذكر شخصية أخرى هي عباس الحسين بن الشيخ، وبلده أيضا غالب بن الشيخ، وهو معروف اليوم كوجه من أكبر وجوه الفكر الديني الإسلامي، لأنه يرأس مؤسسة إسلام فرنسا، مؤسسة حديثة العهد، يعني أسست منذ سنوات فقط 2015. وهو يشرف أيضا غالب بن الشيخ يشرف على برنامج عنوانه ثقافات الإسلام في راديو فرنسا الثقافي، فرانس كولتور بالفرنسية. أشار كذلك الدكتور بيولوك إلى حضور المسلمين في الجيش الفرنسي منذ الحرب العالمية الأولى، وإلى السماح للمسلمين منذ فترة طويلة بامتلاك الجنسية الفرنسية بغض النظر عن الدين أو العرق والأصل، وكذلك ذكر دعم إدماج الدين الإسلامي في المؤسسات الفرنسية وطبعا الغربية. قدم كذلك الدكتور بعض النسب وبعض الإحصائيات تبلغ نسبة المسلمين في فرنسا قرابة 8% من إجمالي السكان، وهناك أيضا إحصائيات تبين وجود عدد المساجد وعدد المتدينين إلى غير ذلك طبعا من الدراسات الاجتماعية أو الديموغرافية المعروفة لدى المختصين. ثم بين كيف أن الإسلام الممارس في فرنسا كان مرتبطا بالهجرة، وبالتالي كان تابعا للقنصليات التي تختلف في نظرته عن الدين وعلاقته بالمجتمع والدولة. فالبعض كما تعلمون ذو توجه صوفي تقليدي، والبعض الآخر ذو توجه إيديولوجي حركي أو تبليغي دعوي. هناك من ينتمي إلى التيارات الإسلامية الحربية، وهناك من ينتمي طبعا إلى التيارات الوهابية أو السلفية أو الصوفية التقليدية، يعني عدة مدارس من المغرب والجزائر وغيرها من البلدان العربية الإسلامية. ولذا يعني فرنسا وجدت نفسها أمام هذا الواقع المرتبط بأصول المهاجرين الدينية، ولذا كان لزاما على الدولة الفرنسية التفكير في إدماج الإسلام في المجتمع الفرنسي والعمل على تنظيمه بشكل مختلف، يعني مختلف عن تلك الثقافات القديمة التي جاءت بها تلك الطوائف أو الفئات التي هاجرت من هذه البلدان. وهذا طبعا ما قاد إلى تكوين المجلس الفرنسي للديانة الإسلامية، وهي جمعية أسست سنة 2003 بإعازة من ساركوزي الذي كان آنذاك وزيرا للداخلية في فرنسا قبل أن يصبح فيما بعد رئيسا كما تعلمون، وحرية عدم ممارسته كذلك.
I might just conclude this part saying that in 2003, when the French National Council for Muslim Religion has been launched under the French Ministry of Interior, Nicolas Sarkozy was trying to gather all those organizations we've seen to make a national body. He had in mind the example of the Catholics or the Jewish organization, sorry, I didn't translate it, but the Conférence des Évêques de France, or Consistoire for Judaism, which are like really rooted national and Unitarian body. And in the case of French Islam, it wasn't possible because of the sociological composition and the diversity of French Islam, as we saw. So this proves the diversity of Islam in France, but this also proves the fact that CFCM was not really effective on many points, that it didn't work as a real national body of its own. It also proves that religion is not state-run in France in a way, in a almost paradoxical way. It proves that the state do not interfere directly, actually, into the organization of Islam in France. But yet, they try to find a path to settle some problems since. So those were some of the independent imams and rectors were not included in the CFCM, but very effective at the local level. And precisely the local level will begin an important part of the future of organization in Islam. So a new dialogue era between the state and French Muslims. The title mentioned a new dialogue between the state and French Muslims. You might respond, what about separation then? As it is the name of the 1905 law, which separates the church from the state. Laïcité and 1905 laws implies separation, non-political intervention into religion, and the other way around. But it does not mean that dialogue and even co-construction of practical solutions to problems are impossible. And this is what we are going to have a look at right now. So 1 month and a half after the terrorist attacks led on 7 and 9 January 2015 in Paris by three young French Muslim citizens who killed 15 persons, the French Ministry of Interior Bernard Cazeneuve chose to visit the mosques of Bordeaux and Senon in southwestern France to publicly announce on February 25th the creation of a national dialogue commission with French Islam, Instance de dialogue avec l'Islam. This new national body, which gathered for the first time on June the 15th, 2015, aims at extending dialogue with French Muslims and support the CFCM to tackle pressing issues such as imam training, countering Islamophobia, countering radicalism, searching for solutions related to the lack of mosques in certain parts of the country, or facilitating the organization of Eid al-Kabir, very practical issues, or more hot issues. So that was kind of a new turn for French Secular Republic and for Islam in France. The Ministry of Interior, about the method, through its central office for the relation with religions, the Centre des Cultes, issued a circulaire to organize in each of the 96 prefectures of the country, a large consultation with local Muslim actors, NGOs, civil society, intellectuals, and academics. The issues that has been put into evidence are sent to the Ministry of Interior, and the synthesis is done, and about 200 people involved in the debates locally, mostly Muslims, are invited at the Ministry for an entire day, divided in 4 sessions, ended by a feedback of each session, both by an official and a local Muslim actor, with the presence of the ministers and members of the CFCM. So here you have an illustration of the first national commissions and what were the issues coming from the ground to the center, the preoccupations of French Muslims locally. Protection of places of worship, anti-Muslims as an image of Islam, because of course after the January attacks, which were treated at the security level, but one of the consequences for sure was the fact that some mosques has been attacked, even some imams, so that was a pressing issue to solve. And so a workshop has been settled, and the mosques that requested the installation of a security system, cameras and so on, could have, for instance, very practically, the security system funded by a specific fund for that. And I think it tells a lot about, on the one hand, the separation, and on the other hand, freedom of religion in France. Because the state cannot found religions because of the separation, but it should also make the liberty, facilitates liberty of religions. If an individual or a group is impeded to worship his religion, then laicity is not fulfilled. So here, for instance, the security system could be found by a specific fund dedicated to that. Second workshop, legal and practical advice for the construction of worship, because sometimes there were very concrete issues which were not grasped by local Muslims who wanted to build a mosque. Sometimes there were troubles with groups who began by building a mosque, but then they didn't fulfill all the requirements and all the documents, and then the building was stopped. So this workshop work as legal and practical advices for the construction of worship place for those groups. And a guide has been issued after the workshop. After the workshop, each workshop would meet 3 or 4 times after this first national commission. Workshop 3, Imam and Chaplain training, but I'm not going to get too much into details. It's just that it helped reinforce the secular training for Imam and Chaplains in France through partnership with university, through a system we call DU, Diplôme Universitaire Civil et Civique. So the Imams and Chaplains, and it became compulsory through a law 2017 only for chaplains working in hospitals, the military, and in prisons. And they are trained in 3 major fields: French history and institutions, law and religions, and human and social sciences of religions. But for the rest of the imams or priests or whatever religious cleric, it's not compulsory. This is on an individual basis, just for chaplains, because they work in state institutions. And there is now more than 33 DU Civil et Civique diploma all around France. And the 4th workshop, ritual practices. So as far as I'm concerned, for instance, I helped settling the Aïd el-Kabir one, because there was much more demand in France of Aïd el-Kabir
to celebrate Eid al-Kabir, so much more demand on sheep, very practical issue, than the capacity of the slaughterhouse to produce halal meat. So this also, in a way, impede freedom of religion, and this had to be settled. So we had 4 workshops, 4 gatherings, and we issued a practical guide how to succeed, and even on the niveau sanitaire, at the sanitary level, to respect a lot of norms from the French Ministry of Agriculture, etc. This was not an evident issue, but all the actors of the meat industry, Muslim local representatives, Ministry of Agriculture, prefectures, gathered around the table. And I think this was a good example of etc., etc. And so here you just have the example of the 2 other, the theme actually of the issues of the other national dialogue. So, of course, the second one very marked with the question of radicalization, because it occurred post-November 2015 attacks where more than 200 of our fellow citizens has unfortunately been killed by terrorists. So the debate was about how to de-radicalize some youth. And then the third national commission oriented toward how to found a project for French Islam, but still the answer from the ground, from the field, from the local actors. Then it transformed into, with the new Ministry of Interior, Gérard Collomb, Assise territoriale de l'Islam de France, ex-mayor of Lyon, a town that Mكرم knows quite well. And then finally, February 2022, the Forum of Islam in France is the last forum for gathering local representative of Islam in France, but I'm not going to get into details with this issue. And I think I will keep my little seed for the end with some sort of a conclusion. But there it is. Yeah, I will keep my conclusion in the seed, and probably you can. Do you want to translate what I said here, because I said a lot of things, or should I say a few words? Okay, a few words about the third and last part of the presentation, because those issues spread throughout Muslim majorities countries such as the Kuwait, and needs to be, I think, quite well grasped and understood. For instance, the question of the contested vêtements in so I'm going to right now find my notes. Yes, there it is. The contested hijabi or mutajiba and the reaction of the president of the local assembly in October 2019. I don't know if you're familiar or if you remember this issue. A high school class was attending to a session of the Regional Council of Bourgogne in Franche-Comté, and the mother of one of the pupils was there to accompany the class, which is something quite usual. And a far-right member of the assembly officially asked the president of the Regional Council to get this woman out of the room in the name of laicity. And this was a real, this spread throughout not only the internet, but the context and the answer of the president wasn't that much reminded. And what happened is that the president of the regional council reminded him, this far-right member, and usually sometimes when this news spread, it wasn't even mentioned that the man who issued this idea was from the far-right movement. And second, the president of the regional council reminded him what
the correct understanding of the law, the separation law is, nothing forbids her to be in with her hijab, as she's not here as an official, so as a representative of a political party.
So this was the answer, and then I translated the tweet from the president of the regional council.
Another example of that kind of misunderstanding or social network spreading of fake news, more or less, is the local burkini ban and the decision of the state council. So there were clearly some mayors from southern France who would publish ban of burkini, sorry, integral. Sorry, but I don't have it in English. And in the beach, which is part of their city, the city administrative. But by August 2016, the State Council issued his own opinion on the question. Not opinion, but reminding of the law. Sorry, I should point right here. Yeah, no, okay, let's go. There it is. In French, right here, arrêter le TGU a porté une atteinte grave et manifestement illégale aux libertés fondamentales que sont la liberté d'aller et venir, la liberté de conscience, la liberté personnelle. In a nutshell, the local ban of burkini on some beaches has been considered by the State Council as something that undermines fundamental liberties regarding the conceptions of separation and more particularly here, the conception of freedom of religion. And there was another big issue, but I don't think I have time to mention it, or just to mention it. There was a rumor of the ban of traditional slaughtering in France, and because this rumor was spread by mass, but actually it was something that has been misread, and it wasn't it wasn't a threat on the derogation of for an animal to be slaughtered without being stunned, without being dizzy, right? There is an authorization for Jewish community and Muslim community in France, a derogation to the dizziness, because once again, otherwise they will be in trouble with being able to worship correctly their religion as they want. But this is an ongoing debate. There is, for instance, an organization which defends the right of animals that are pressing to forbid this, to stop this derogation, as it is the case, for instance, in Belgium or in the Netherlands, countries that are usually considered to be more liberal in terms of freedom of religion, liberty of expression of religious thought. But then they stop this derogation while it is still possible in France. So I'm going to get right now to the conclusion. That way, sorry. This would seem. Well, there is a community for people who want the full PowerPoint with the links. I'm going to get back to the first slide then, and then you can send me an email and I will send you the PowerPoint, and you will access all that. And there is another issue, but we don't have the time to grasp it. But what is interesting is this loi confortant les principes républicains, les principes de la République. The other name is anti-separatism law. You have a link with English or Arabic subtitles on the explanations of this law recently voted by the coordinator of the National Intelligence and Anti-Terrorist Services. So, because that was also a debate, I can get, unfortunately, into details
in this debate you will see the explanation. So yes, as in every society, we are still, and particularly in this context, in the situation of the eternal struggle between control, security, and liberty. But as the French philosopher Michel Serres puts it, history and tradition supports us, but might find their true sense only through a renewal which looks in the direction of which looks toward the future. So I think a common path for Islam and France could be this quote could be a good path for a common trajectory for France and Islam. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I will translate this last part very quickly. إذا بالنسبة للقسم الثالث كان عنوان صفحة جديدة من الحوار بين الدولة والمسلمين. انطلقت هذه الصفحة سنة 2015 بعد الهجمات الإرهابية التي تعرضت لها فرنسا، وتأسست لجنة أعمال دعم الحوار الوطني مع المسلمين أساسا نظرا للتوترات التي نجمت بين الجالية المسلمة وبين بعض الفئات التي اعتبرت الإرهاب مسؤولية المسلمين. هذه اللجنة إضافة طبعا إلى عدة فرق ومؤسسات وشخصيات عملت على تحديد بعض النقاط المهمة التي ذكرها الدكتور، والتي من ضمنها أولا سأقول بتلخيصها بعجالة. أولا كان هناك ضرورة الاعتماد على مبدأ العلمانية وإطارها القانوني لحماية حرية الدين والعقيدة. ثانيا كان هناك تركيز على تكوين الأئمة وتدريبهم خاصة في مجالات العلوم الإنسانية والاجتماعية، لأن معارفهم قد تكون قديمة متعرية أو غير مبنية على ضوابط علمية دقيقة. وأشار الدكتور في القسم الثاني إلى ظهور تيارات مثلا معتزلية جديدة تنتمي إلى الاعتزال الجديد في فرنسا، أو إلى ظهور مثلا يعني بعض الحركات التي تدعو إلى تجديد الدين الإسلامي حتى فيما يخص ممارسة الشعائر. مثلا هناك مسجد يعني تقوم فيه صلاة أمرأة موجود في باريس، كما هناك تجارب أخرى في أوروبا أو في أمريكا. طبعا هذه نقطة مهمة جدا، مسألة تكوين الأئمة خاصة في مجال العلوم الإنسانية والاجتماعية. بين قوسين يعني أذكر حادثة للأخوة الموجودين في القاعة لم يذكرها الدكتور ولكنه يعرفها جيدا، حادثة إمام مدينة أوبرفييه وهي مدينة قرب باريس. أثارت هذه الحادثة ضجة كبرى لأنه قام بخطبة أمام أطفال صغار وقال لهم بأن سماع الموسيقى محرم، وأن الشخص الذي لا يحترم هذا الأمر الإلهي سيمسح خلدا أو خنزيرا. طبعا هذه الحادثة كانت هناك عليها ردود كثيرة من طرف عدة أطياف من المجتمع الفرنسي، ولكنها تدل يعني على ثقافة هذا الشخص. طبعا هو شخص يعني شاب في مقتبل العمر، ولكنه لم يكن متمكنا حتى من المدونات الفقهية التي تحدثت عن مسائل الموسيقى وتحليلها وتحليلها وما إليه. أغلق هذا القوس. نعلم جيدا يعني إضافة إلى هذا أن العديد من الخطب قد تكون حاملة لخطاب كراهية الآخر وعدم احترام الأديان، أو أنها تروج لأحكام رديئة أو لأفكار رديئة باسم الدين. وفي هذا المجال ما تعيشه فرنسا تعيشه كذلك العديد من البلدان العربية والإسلامية. النقطة الثالثة التي تناولتها هذه الأشغال ورقات الأشغال في فرنسا ومنذ 2015 والعديد من اللجان، النقطة الثالثة كانت تتمثل في التصدي للتطرف الديني وزرع الكراهية والحقد بين الناس، مثل الخطابات الجهادية التي نجدها أحيانا في المساجد يوم الجمعة كما تعلمون. خاصة وأن الهجمات الإرهابية التي تعرضت لها فرنسا كانت من طرف أشخاص فرنسيين ولدوا في فرنسا وتربوا في فرنسا، فهم إذا من جملة يعني إنتاجات المجتمع وفرازات المجتمع الفرنسي. كان هذا حاملا على طرح تساؤل جوهري عن مغزى يعني هذا الاتجاه وهذا الانتماء يعني في أحضان الجهادية والجهاديين. النقطة الرابعة طبعا التي عملت على إنشائها لجنة الحوار الوطني كانت تتمثل في حماية أماكن العبادة للمسلمين، لأنهم تعرضوا أيضا إلى خطابات الحقد والكراهية وحتى إلى اعتداءات جسدية، يعني بعض المسلمين اعتدي عليهم جسديا. فعملت الدولة على عدم السماح بالمساس بصورة الإسلام والمسلمين أو القيام بأعمال عدائية تجاههم، إضافة طبعا إلى التفكير في كيفية تمويل إنجاز مساجد أو أماكن العبادة تليق بمقام أداء الشعائر الإسلامية. ولذا فإن الدولة كانت فكرت يعني منذ تلك الفترة عفوا في تحسين وضعية المسلمين الدينية دون المساس طبعا بجوهر النظام العلماني الذي يقتضي ألا يكون هناك دعم مالي من الدولة لأي دين أو فئة دينية. النقطة الخامسة التي ذكرها الدكتور والتي أقوم بتلخيصها بعجالة هو محاولة هذه اللجنة أن تخلق ما يسمى بالإسلام الفرنسي، وهذا طبعا جوهر القضية في هذه المحاضرة، كيف يعني عملت فرنسا شيئا فشيئا على خلق ما يسمى الإسلام بالفرنس، الإسلام والفرنس، الإسلام الفرنسي والإسلام الفرنسي. لأن الإسلام نشأ في فرنسا انطلاقا من الهجرة كما ذكرنا منذ قليل، ولذا فإن العديد من الأئمة ينتمون إما إلى الصوفية أو إلى التيارات الفقهية المالكية. من أتى مثلا من الجزائر أو المغرب الأقصى طبعا هم مالكية، ومن أتى من تركيا أو حنفية. فهناك العديد من التيارات الفقهية وحتى الإيديولوجية والسياسية. ونشأت عدة صراعات أيضا على المستوى السياسي بين الجزائر وبين المغرب وبين تركيا، الجزائريين والمغاربة والأتراك، للتحكم في المجلس الفرنسي للديانة الذي أنشأه ساركوزي سنة 2003. لذا يعني قادت كل هذه التراكمات وكل هذه الصراعات إلى بروز العديد من الشخصيات المسلمة الشابة الراغبة في تأسيس إسلام فرنسي يعتمد على الفرنسية في الخطب ويكون فيه إمام ملما بالثقافة العربية والعلوم الاجتماعية والإنسانية. وهذه المحاولات طبعا أفرزت يعني عدة تجارب طريفة تحدث عنها الدكتور مثل مسجد فاطمة الذي تقوم فيه صلاة امرأة. النقطة السادسة والأخيرة التي بينها الدكتور هو أن هذه اللجنة كانت تعمل أيضا على محاربة الأخبار الكاذبة الفيك نيوز التي راجت على وسائل الإعلام على وسائل التواصل الاجتماعي فيما يخص علاقة فرنسا بالإسلام والمسلمين. وهذا ما رأيناه مؤخرا فيما يتعلق بالحجاب، قضية الحجاب التي حللها الدكتور، أو لباس السباحة الخاص بالمحجبات البركيني، أو مسألة الأكل الحلال والتفكية حسب ضوابط الشريعة الإسلامية وغير ذلك من الأمور. وختم الدكتور محاضرته بقولة لميشيل سار تتحدث عن ضرورة إعادة قراءة التراث والموروث، وطبعا هذه القولة هي صالحة لكل الحضارات سواء كانت حضارة إسلامية أو حضارة غربية. وشكرا. المجال مفتوح للأسئلة، so you could ask your